Okay, it's 2 p.m., so I believe that we can start today's seminar. My name is Jakub Krzeski. I'm a member of SCRG research group, and this is my great pleasure to welcome you all to our fourth meeting in our series of seminars on science and semi-periphery. Today we have a great pleasure to have with us Dr. Kamil Luczaj, and he will discuss with us Poland as an academic periphery, and he also will share some insights from a qualitative study of foreign-born faculty. Dr. Luczaj is an assistant professor at the University of Information Technology and Management in Rzeszów, and also currently he is visiting academic at the Faculty of Education at University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom. His research focuses on migration studies and the sociology of culture. He is a member of the Committee for Migration Studies, Polish Academy of Science. So great to have you here with us, Łukasz. We're very excited to listen to your presentation and learn from you about your topic. Just a brief announcement how we will proceed during our seminar. So first, Łukasz will have around 30 minutes to present his topic. Then I will invite Staszek from our research group to share some commentaries. He will have around 10 minutes to just give some comments, maybe pose some key problems that can serve us later on during the discussion. I will give back voice to you, Łukasz, so you could answer Staszek's comments, and then I will invite all the participants of today's seminar to join in, and we will have group conversation around today's topic. So during the discussion, please use the app to raise your hand, and in that way I will give you the voice and try to moderate the discussion. So without further ado, here the screen is yours, and I'm muting myself.
Thank you, Jakub, so much. It's an honor to be here. So let me share my presentation with you. It should be visible by now. Okay. So let's get started. So today I'm gonna talk about Poland as an academic periphery based on my qualitative studies, number of them. But let's start with the agenda. So I will start my talk with discussing the concept of academic migration and various types of academic migration between peripheries and center of global knowledge production. Then I will briefly discuss my empirical data, which will allow me to answer the question of is Poland a periphery or semi-periphery? And if I will have enough time, then I will try to discuss some major motivations of foreign-born scholars to come to Poland, live here, or conduct their research here. So let's start with this academic migration concept, because this is problematic, to be honest, because every author defines academic migration in different ways. So generally, there's an agreement that academic migration is a spatial movement of people involved in teaching or research activities. But as you can see here, this movement can refer to either settled migrants or circular or shuttle migrants, often international commuters who just work and live in two countries. These are transnational professionals. It's especially common in Poland, in Eastern Poland, where a lot of Ukrainians, Belarusians, or Lithuanians work. But also, sometimes this concept embraces migrants for a specific period of time, mainly various scholarship holders who come to Poland to do a postdoc research, or because they were given an opportunity to be a Fulbright scholar and so on. So there's a large disagreement which of these groups should be included. I prefer inclusive definitions. So in most of my projects, I've been interviewing all those groups. But there's another initial problem. Who should count as a researcher? Because sometimes there's a criterion of having a PhD or equivalent, but in some studies, also people without a PhD are being analyzed. Sometimes researchers also include industrial researchers or industrial scholars who are not necessarily affiliated with higher education institutions. Sometimes also PhD students are counted as academics or scholars. So there's no one clear-cut definition, but I wanted to start with emphasizing that in my research, I'm interested in people affiliated with higher education institutions, either in Poland or in the UK. And I'm not particularly interested in student migration, which is interrelated but separate phenomenon. Key thing here is that while we have a lot of data on student migration, we can't really rely on any numbers regarding migrating scholars, because even if there are some national statistics, they're barely comparable on the international level, so it's difficult to count them. If you would like to believe what's in the Poland system, in official Polish statistics, it would mean that in Poland right now we have approximately 3,000 foreign-born researchers, but in my opinion, this number is not reliable, but I don't have time to delve into details. So we have the concept of academic migration. One crucial comment here. As you can see, mobility is usually an opportunity, but sometimes it could be a trap. And I use this Bauman's quote here to show you that many of my researchers had to commute long hours. As you can see on these infographics, it was common to travel between Warsaw and Berlin, or between Budapest and Bratislava, or even between Warsaw and London by plane each week or bi-weekly. So there are huge costs of mobility, and in this presentation, I'll try to emphasize both the bright sides, but also dark sides of academic mobility in peripheries. So the last concept here is periphery. Again, we have many definitions of this concept. Obviously, in the Wallersteinian original framework, we had this economical base, and it was relatively easy to delineate between centers and peripheries. In his famous report from 1996, Wallerstein himself pointed to some centers in the social sciences, which is common sense knowledge, because historically it was Great Britain, France, Germany, or what is Germany right now, Italy, and the US, of course. But the problem is that if you do a query in Scopus, you will find various definitions of a periphery. Some authors use this concept to refer to a region, a particular region of a developed country, for instance, of Australia. Some Australian authors believe that they live in the peripheries. Sometimes this concept is applied to affluent Arabic countries like Qatar or United Arab Emirates. Sometimes even we can find papers referring to Nordic countries as peripheries, which is disputable, but sometimes it occurs. So For this presentation, I propose the following working definition of a periphery, which is a spatial location whose inhabitants either feel that they need to catch up with the core part of the world, or they consciously agree to take a marginal position in this system of knowledge production. I will explain those two points later on, but it's helpful to keep in mind that we can use alternative frameworks. For instance, a couple of weeks ago, Simon Marginson argued that hegemony is far better concept than center and periphery. Or last time, Leandro Medina argued for this epistemic authority concept. I think that those approaches are complementary, but today I will refer to certain countries as peripheries and certain as centers. Let's have a look at this chart, because if you would analyze literature on academic migrations, you will just delineate 4 options. So the widely discussed phenomenon is the migration between one global center to another. For example, German scholars seeking better working conditions in the US. It's quite known phenomenon, with better working conditions but higher salaries being the most important factors here. Also, migration from global peripheries to global centers is quite well known. Obviously, we have the same factors: competitive remuneration, but also prestige or reputation is also emphasized here. But today, I will focus on those 2 types of migration. First, migration from global centers to the peripheries, which is emerging phenomenon in higher education literature. The bottom line here is that main motivators can be different from those traditional types of migration. For instance, family migration is of huge importance here, lifestyle migration. But the important thing is that research excellence is very rarely the main motivator for those researchers. For instance, Americans or British people in Poland are great examples of this kind of migration. But as you all know, in Poland we have many Ukrainian scholars, and this will lead us to the 4th option, to the migration from one periphery to other periphery, or from one periphery to semi-periphery. And here, these people are mainly economically driven, but not only. And today I'm going to discuss their motivations in detail. So, brief look at the empirical data. So, as you can see, I will talk about 5 different projects. The first one was initiated nearly 10 years ago, when with Professor Janusz Mucha, we started to investigate foreign-born academics in Krakow. That was a pilot study based on a limited number of the interviews. But next, for 2 years, I've been interviewing foreign-born academics in many Polish cities. So me and my team, we made 100 individual in-depth interviews with foreigners and 20 interviews with their Polish colleagues. Then I was for 1 semester in Slovakia, and I was interviewing foreign-born scholars there. Many of them were Polish, so there's a comparative angle here. Now I'm in Cambridge, and I'm dealing with slightly different issues, because I'm talking to Polish professors in the UK, and I also do some Skype interviews in the US. But I also recently started a project on working class academics in Poland. I will just mix the findings of those studies to answer this question about the peripherality of Polish academia. So I think we can skip the methodological question with one exception. You should be aware that I'm going to talk about, or I'm talking about qualitative data, which is good. This method is good to solicit in-depth opinions, some argumentation strategies, but those interviews are hardly generalizable. So I will not offer you any numbers today. And you should also keep in mind that this peripherality, which I will discuss in a minute, was an emerging theme in this research. I was not asking directly about peripherality, but during our discussions, in answer to other questions, this theme was visible, and it was one of the most best grounded themes in my research project. So based on those interviews with foreign-born academics in Poland, we can say that Polish system is a peripheral one because of 6 main reasons, which I dubbed status periphery, career periphery, mental periphery, workplace periphery, relational, and language periphery. So let's have a look at some examples here. So career periphery refers mainly to various economical factors. As most of you are probably aware, salaries in Poland are low, so people are not satisfied, and some of them seriously consider migration. But this is an obvious thing. Less obvious are the effects of these low salaries, because as my interviewees were pointed, many of them had to take more than one academic position or try to be entrepreneurial to make a living, because to live with a junior salary in Poland was impossible for them, especially if they have children or dependents. You can see a meaningful quote here in this red frame. The author is a Westerner, a person from Western Europe who migrated to Poland for family reasons. And as you can see, his position is precarious here, because he works long hours, because he have like half of normal position at the university, and then he's employed by many language schools to get a decent salary. So he admitted that his situation ameliorated recently, because he's home at 8:30, not 9:30 anymore, which he has a PhD, obviously, from a quite decent Western institution. But multiple job holding is not the only problem, because as I mentioned, some of those people wasted their time for international commuting to have a second job in Slovakia, for example. They obviously didn't have time for research, which made all their life precarious. So that's a career periphery. We have those processes which are rare in the Western Europe. Next thing is language periphery. So let me quote one joke told by one of my respondents. As you can see here, she said that if God tried to get a full-time university contract in her own country, he would be rejected because he wrote only one book, and in Hebrew, not in English, which is usually the expectation. But I was wondering if this joke is funny in Poland at all, because in Poland you can do your academic duties without any knowledge of English. What's more, all the internal communication is usually conducted in Poland. So my respondents stressed out that it was difficult for them to maintain simple contact with administration. Sometimes they asked their wives, their life partners to act as translators in everyday communications, not to mention small talks, which are exclusively in Polish, so those people felt excluded. Some grant applications in Poland are also in Polish, so those people needed assistance to apply. Publishing is another big issue because, as you see in this box on the bottom, some of the international scholars, international people who came from one country to another, argued against publishing in English. They said that once they come to Poland, they became Polish scientists, so they should publish in Polish for Polish audiences, and especially if there were like historians or cultural researchers, then they were convinced that publishing in Polish is the great option. Obviously, not knowing Polish language was a problem in teaching and in getting administrative positions like dean of the faculty. I can't recall any case where a foreigner was a dean at the Polish universities. It's extremely rare, mainly due to, maybe not mainly, but language barrier was one of the major obstacles. Then we have what I call status periphery, because when I was asking about prestige or reputation about Polish universities, my interviewees responded that we were somewhere in the middle between the West and the rest. As you can see in the first quote, they tend to say that we're better than Uganda or Ukraine, but we are barely comparable to any Western academic system. In some cases, there was also a discrimination against certain nations. The last quote on the left comes from my Slovak studies, but there were similar quotes in Poland. As you can see here, the university wanted to employ international scholar, but not someone from the Czech Republic or Poland, because they were considered inferior. By international, they meant probably British person or American or Canadian or anything like that, but not a Polish or Czech. But status periphery was deeply embedded in my interviewees' thinking, also because they observed that a lot of people decided to quit Poland, decided to relocate to the US or other countries. So they felt that maybe that's an option. So if everyone wants to leave, why I should stay here? We have also what I called workplace periphery, and here are two themes to discuss. First of all, as you probably can guess, the equipment at Polish universities can be really bad. The first quote is the most important here, I think, because my interviewee compares American reality with Polish reality by saying that in the US, she could do all the tests she needed in one day. And in Poland, it could take up to 1 month or so to do the same test. So she's not really capable of publishing in top journals, because what an American can do within 24 hours takes her days, weeks, or months. But what's interesting is that not only outdated equipment is a problem, but also this organizational culture. The interviewee, number 88, was a scholar employed in one of the best Polish universities. He applied for a grant and bought extremely expensive equipment just to learn that next door, the other member of his faculty has exactly the same instrument, but no one told him that he could just come there and do his measurements. So he had to apply for large funds, then go through this tender procedure just to buy the same equipment. And there were many comments like that, that management is really poor in Poland compared to especially Western countries. Here you've got my favorite example. That's a huge technical university from Western Poland, and a colleague of one of my respondents were told by vice rector that they cannot afford window blinds, so perhaps they could wear sunglasses in their offices to just be able to work normally, because the university cannot afford window blinds, which was a first shock, and that was a first shock in Poland for him. Then we have what I call mental periphery. Some of my respondents thought that the problem with Polish science lies in the mentality, which dates back to the communist system, because some people are not friendly, not helpful, not interested in learning any languages, so it makes life harder. Obviously, we have a lot of stereotypes in this kind of thinking, but I always ask them to provide me with some examples of this mentality. So the hierarchical structure of Polish university was the most common answer. They said that in the West, you can feel like a partner. In Poland, you always feel like an employee. You always have your boss above your head, which is absolutely not helpful. Some people also discussed what I call relational periphery, meaning that they don't have real contact with global experts. Obviously, they can invite someone for a keynote speech or for some kind of workshops, but these collaborations are very rarely regular, and especially compared to Germany and other Western countries, it makes their academic life harder. And now I have something special for you. I'm glad that Svetlana is today with us, because I would like you to read those two quotes. The first one about language, the knowledge of the local language, which is crucial for an academic, and the second one is about what? About journals, academic journals, points, and research evaluation. What do you think? Which country is it about? It refers to which country? Could it be about Poland? Would you say so? Because in my opinion, it could be, but it's not about Poland, it's about Belarus. It's taken from Svetlana's recent PhD study. But I have another pair of citations. So you have two female PhD students who are narrating about working long hours in the night to make for a living, because their PhD scholarship was not enough to make a decent living. And again, those quotes are not about Poland, but about Belarus. But when I was reading Svetlana's thesis, I thought that my respondents had exactly the same observations about Polish reality. What's more, when I was preparing this presentation, I also put this slide about political control and censorship. And I thought that those were obviously Belarusian problems, not comparable to the Polish context. But then this problem at the Pedagogical University in Krakow occurred, that our current government make some pressure to fire professors and senior lecturers from these institutions. Obviously, the official motivation was economical, but we all know that there was a political pressure to fire those liberal professors. So to some extent, Poland is getting more and more similar to those authoritarian regimes, but obviously, there's still huge difference between Poland and Belarus. Here you've got two extreme examples about mandatory job placement still in place in Belarus, and fiction of practical implementation of every PhD thesis, which in Belarus should be proved in every case. Even if it's a pure fiction, you just need a stamp from the factory which would certify that your PhD thesis was practical. So in Poland, so far, we don't have such pressures, which allows us to differentiate between periphery and the center, because as you can see here or here, that's a quote from one of my interviewees talking about lack of electricity or going or closing university to save some money during vacation. So in Poland, we don't have those problems. So I think we should argue that Poland is a semi-periphery. That's why we need this concept to differentiate ourselves from both the West and deep peripheries, like some African systems or Belarus, for instance. So I think I basically ran out of time. So let me briefly show you two more things. So so far I show why some international academics may feel that they work in peripheries. But now, please have a look at this slide. Here you've got some basic motivations to come to Poland, and I divided them into three main groups. Those in blue are what I call traditional motivations, because Poland can attract some people involved in Polish studies, some former students of Polish universities, some postdocs and mobile scholars, for example, via Marie Curie scholarship scheme, and some delegated or invited scholars, for instance, French language lecturers supported by Alliance Française, or other people based on contracts between two particular universities. So, but this blue part is typical for any country everywhere. What's special in Poland are those in red, because we have this intermediate category of family-tied academics and economic migrants, which are also common to in other countries. But what's interesting in Poland is that we have what I call last resort scholars, mainly people who are unsuccessful in securing an academic post abroad in the US or the UK. There are sometimes graduates of Harvard or Cambridge, but they didn't have work at home, so they decided to go to Poland because there was available position for them, and they decided to do so. Some of those academics were adventurers, meaning that purposefully they chose to go east. They wanted to escape from the Western reality and to have a living in what may be referred to as wild country in Eastern Europe. And the last category here are missionaries. Missionaries meaning people who wanted to help a post-communist country in an economic transformation. So these people could be simultaneously a professor in Warsaw, visiting professor in Warsaw, and full professor, let's say, in Copenhagen. And they took this job in Warsaw, not because of money, not because of career prospects, but just because they wanted to help. They felt that they have knowledge to make Poland more modern, make Poland more politically stable. So that was her mission, just like Max Weber predicted 100 years ago. There are these people with mission, so that's why missionaries. And the last thing for today, how those people end up in Poland. So I call this mechanism a dart throw. The dart throw is an emic category from one of my interviewees who said that his decision process was just like throwing a dart because he just lost his American job and was seeking for another. And one of his fellow researchers said that there's an option to work in Slovakia. He never heard about Slovakia, but in this case, he decided to go there. And at the moment of the interview, he was a professor in Slovakia for 10 years or so. So he settled in Slovakia for good. But those people, their individual career strategy was not the plan. It never came first. There were like external factors which helped them to take a decision to relocate to Poland or Slovakia. There's especially meaningful quote in the lower right hand corner here, again from Slovakia, about Google Maps. So this American respondent have no clue where Bratislava was located, so he had to Google it after he got a position in Bratislava, and again he relocated and now is a Slovak scholar. Many of these professors were not academics prior to the migration. Some of them were like airport clerks or journalists. So this migration was a huge opportunity for them. And the last thing here is just compare the agency between two groups. The first group are my current interviewees, usually upper middle class Poles who relocated to the US or the UK during their university studies. And they tend to say things like that. When I was 10, I decided to go to Oxford. Or I always felt I didn't have just one homeland. There's this transnational human capital visible here. But many of the Western scholars in Poland and Slovakia didn't have this sense of agency. They were narrating about their careers as happiness or luck, or they just pointed out to colleagues who gave them this opportunity or told them that there's such a country as Slovakia. So to conclude, why Poland is a semi-periphery? So we have four arguments here. The first one, the scholars, the participants of my research project usually tend to position themselves in the middle between the West and the rest. They thought that many working settings are better in Germany or in the UK, but at the same time they were fully aware that Ukraine, Belarus cannot offer them anything nearly comparable. Second point is that while we can point out to some peripheral processes in Poland, such as international commuting or moonlighting or taking two jobs at the same time, those problems are visible, but we still don't have this political pressure, censorships typical for academic peripheries. Third thing is that even those peripheral processes in Poland are less intensive than in, for instance, in Belarus. Even if an international scholar in Poland can feel isolated, he or she would feel more isolated in Arabic countries or China, Belarus, or those deep peripheries. And the last thing is what Professor Nowak said a couple of weeks ago here at this seminar, that Poland has its own peripheries. So the Poland should be regarded kind of a center, because Ukraine or Belarus are to some degree peripheries of Poland. So I believe that on these grounds, we can say that Poland should be positioned as semi-periphery. We are not periphery because we can differentiate many systems of our higher education system from Belarus, Russia, Qatar, and other countries like that. But still, we're not perceived as global centers. We have quantitative measurements. We can have a look at various rankings, various numbers, but also in those qualitative interviews, we can clearly see that international scholars feel like they are just in the middle or in the semi-periphery. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kamil. It was really interesting. I think that we often make this assumption that, by we mean Polish scholars, that our status is in some way problematic, and therefore we make this assumption about our semi-peripherality. But we rarely question this assumption, so it's great that you came and force us, challenge us to actually pose this question: what do actually mean by saying that our status here is in some way problematic? But I think that it's time for Staszek commentary. So Staszek, I would like to invite you to provide your comments and initiate the discussion.
Hello, everyone, and thanks, Kamil, for the presentation. I'll be using a handout, just a one-page handout I have to share. You also have it in the chat window. Sorry for my voice. I'm not entirely recovered from a nasty cold, but I'm recovered enough, I hope. If I fall silent in 5 minutes and just try to make noises, you know it hasn't worked. My comments will mostly be theoretical or conceptual, and I will be focusing mostly on Kamil's paper on conceptualizing the academic periphery from globalization, societies, and education. But since all 3 papers we have been reading for today and all research Kamil does in this area has a lot to do with conceptualizing periphery, I believe this is also a wider topic. So Robert Merton has observed that some concepts in various fields of science or scholarship are, I was going to say are victims, but that's a strong word. Let's say that the fate of some concepts is that they are obliterated by an incorporation, and perhaps periphery could be one of those concepts, in the sense that we often incorporate the notion of periphery into our everyday academic language, for instance, in the higher education studies field, and we don't always try to define it critically. We don't always reflect on where the concept comes from. I'm glad that Kamil does that. He does analyze that notion critically. He also highlights the emic understandings of this notion, that is to say, the internal perspective. He says how periphery is understood by his respondents, even if they don't use the word periphery itself. At the same time, there is what I think there is an issue that might be discussed, I would like to highlight. And this issue is about a difference between structural and discursive aspects of the definition of academic periphery. To explain what I mean, I'll start by saying that the theorists Kamil comments on in his paper all seem to focus on the structural aspect of periphery, that is to say, on the conditions that social actors in the peripheries act in. Structural does not only mean economic here, it could mean material, it could mean geographical conditions, it could mean social conditions, but it could also mean cultural conditions. For instance, Spivak has written about epistemic violence, and Kamil references that. This is a cultural condition. In the peripheries, actors act under the cultural conditions of epistemic violence, which is to say, they need to deal with the pressure of stronger countries, the pressure, the conceptual pressure, the epistemic pressure that makes it harder to think in categories that are native categories of a particular area, and not categories taken from the stronger countries. And to me, it seems that when Kamil comments on the weak points of these theories, he moves from the structural aspect to the discursive aspect, or perhaps we could also call it a subjective or psychological aspect. He moves to how people think, feel, and what they say about the peripheries, about living in the peripheries. And that means that the structural aspect, the conditions under which those people feel, think, and say things in a particular way, this structural aspect still seems, the structural problem still seems to be unresolved, so to speak. And that would be my main question. If we want to improve on the ideas regarding the definition of the periphery, we can do this by focusing on the discursive aspect, which Kamil does in that paper, and all three papers by Kamil offer a lot in terms of how peripheries are conceptualized, in terms of how people think and feel and what they say under peripheral conditions. And that's an important thing. It's also a part of the process in which peripheries are either maintained, or the status of periphery is either maintained or undermined or negotiated. This is all connected. But I believe it might be also useful to come back to the structural questions posed by the theorists such as Wallerstein or Spivak, and ask ourselves how we could define the conditions of peripherality, the material, economic, geographical, social, or cultural conditions, how we could do that, basing on various sources. One of those sources could probably be Kamil's research, the interviews, the probably number in the hundreds now. I don't recall the exact number, but it could be in the hundreds. And some of the issues that are discussed there on the level of the discursive definition of peripherality could perhaps be transferred to the structural level. In other words, if respondents in interviews say that, for instance, there is a lot of that accident can play a big role in what they do and where they are, then maybe we could incorporate this factor of accidentality in structural definitions of the conditions in peripheral countries. And that's a side question. A side question is that to what extent can the interviews which provide discursive information, to what extent can they be used to build knowledge on structural conditions? And that's it. The two questions, the main one about improving on previous theories in terms of structural conditions of peripherality, and then the side question would regard one of the possible ways to do this. This one of the possible ways would be through what Kamil's respondents have said in interviews. And now that's it.
Okay, so thank you, Staszek, for both of these questions. And let me start with the second one, because this one is easier, obviously. How can interviews help us to discuss those structural temporal features. So my answer would be that this research project or projects were the initial step to improve those theories, because they were like exploratory in their nature. So we didn't have any studies on that subject before. So I gathered a lot of information. Some of them were useful, some of them were not. So because I have hours of transcripts, some of them are not really theoretically useful. But I think that as you know, I'm a qualitative researcher, but I do believe that if we would like to comment on those structural features, we would need quantitative methods. And my studies can help us to formulate some hypotheses that could be tested based on the representative sample, including not only foreign-born scholars, but also Polish scholars, which are the vast majority of our Polish educational system, because I thought that it's a good thing to interview the international scholars, because they could offer this comparative angle. So most of them lived and worked in another system in the West or in the East, so they have this both insider and outsider perspective, but it was all in the micro scale, individual scale, or what you refer to as psychological scale. So I don't think that this material is especially useful to comment or to improve those big structural theories. But that's my main line of reasoning. But there's one exception. For instance, this material, this discursive material, helped to problematize some issues. For instance, in the literature, you can read a lot about whiteness of Polish scholars, which helped them to have successful careers in the West. But the problem is, this is basically not true. The category of whiteness is generalization, but if you do some interviews in the UK, you would very quickly learn that Polish whiteness or Ukrainian whiteness is not the same as British whiteness. So in quantitative study, we should be very careful in using such categories. But anyways, if you would like to improve Connell's or Spivak's theory, or try to make those theories compatible with higher education context, I think that we need to do quantitative study, and that's the only option to use those interviews or this kind of data. So now we have an image and we can test some hypotheses, and then we can say about structure. And let's move on to the first question. When you were posing your question, I recalled an article article by whom? By David Harvey. It was early 1990s, and David Harvey wrote an article about geographical imagination. So he, as a Marxist, usually dealt with those structural features like the economy, some interrelations between different systems. But in this text, Harvey argues that for social geographer, it's crucial to use both social theory and what he called aesthetic theory. So in order to comment on those huge structures, we need to take into account how people perceive the system they live in, because this can be equally important factor, not the reality, but also the imagination of geographical imaginary. And in migration studies, now we can observe many articles building on this geographical imagination concept, which I was investigating through all those years. So I think that what's new in my research is to point out that we should take into account those subjective individual perceptions because they like interact with those huge features analyzed by Connell or by Merton or by anyone else in the field of higher education. But so to wrap things up, I think that this was a necessary, my studies were the necessary step to conduct quantitative research project in Poland to ask questions about certain dimensions of this peripherality, and then we can discuss if the global south or global north are concepts which can be used in the Polish reality or not, but we need another kind of data to do that. So that would be my answer.
Okay, thank to all to two of you for this discussion. Thank you thank you Staszek for posing questions. Thank you Kamil for your answers. But I think that this is a great start, and we can follow from this point. So I would like to invite all the participants to join in. If you have something to add to things that were already said, then please, now is the time. Or maybe there is something new which you would like to also raise during our seminar. So please raise your hand so I could see. Okay. So Franciszek has a question. So Franek, the voice is yours.
Yeah, sure. Thank you all for presentation and for the discussion. And my question was to Kamil about one thing he mentioned a little, but I was considering if it is possible to explore it a little bit more. I thought about your study from other perspective of other like big theoretical concept. It is the concept of Orientalism and like how it can be applied to not only like what is traditionally seen as Oriental, but also to Eastern Europe. And when I thought that you made your interviews with people who were often, as I understand, from the center and to go to this like peripheral or semi-peripheral. So like during conducting interview and maybe during analyzing interview, did you ask yourself or like trying to filter somehow some kinds what we could describe as some kind of Orientalist prejudice, so like some kind of stereotypes about like Eastern Europe, about Poland, which scholars could have been tough doing like their education in the center. And what was the maybe you could observe the proportion of this prejudices to some observations that like of course have some basis in reality, like real poor material conditions in Poland or something like that.
So thank you very much for this question. So my answer will be really short because I didn't even have to ask about those images, because in most of the Western interviews, there were stereotypes about Poland. Some of my interviewees even knew that they were full of those stereotypes prior to coming to Poland. One of the quotes I can recall right now was an interview with a French scholar who said that he wanted to escape this Western boring reality. So initially he thought Germany. Germany is good, it's to the east, so why should maybe I should go to Germany. But then he learned that there are countries east of Germany, for instance, Poland. So he got an offer and instantly decided to go there to have an adventure, because it was late 1990s or something like that. So before our Polish accession to the European Union, but still not so long ago. And he expected that he may encounter many problems with like electricity or water in his household. For instance, his mother or grandmother told him to take a lot of food with him because, you know, Poland is Eastern Europe, so you don't know what you can what the like could be there. And what's interesting here, that these people were educated, but still that they had these stereotypes. We have Katarzyna Waniek with us, or we had Katarzyna Waniek with us, who wrote a brilliant book about migrants in Europe. And her book is about the escape, this theme of escape, that Westerners escape to Eastern Europe to have more pristine life here. And my conclusions are very similar to Katarzyna's conclusions. Maybe one more example answering Franciszek's question. It was quite unexpected to me that Polish conservatism could be an advantage, because we have a few interviewees who believed that their countries like Italy or Switzerland are being secularized. So they were conservative, they were believers, and they thought that it's not good to live in Italy anymore because it's getting too liberal. So maybe we should go to Poland. And then they went to Poland, and they will just they found their place in the world, because people here were more conservative. The role of the church was more prominent, and that was exactly what they expected. Is it a stereotype? I don't really know, but there is still this perception that Poland is backward, that it's good for a short stay. For instance, one of my that will be the last example, I promise. One of my interviewees said that he wanted something exotic. It was an interview in English, so he was British. He was British, so he used the term exotic. But he said that China would be too exotic, so why not Poland for 2 years? But for 2 years, and then I have to come back home, but it's an adventure. So this motive of adventure is often related to some stereotypes or cliches about Poland or Eastern Europe as such.
Okay, any other questions? If not, then I have a question. I was wondering, Kamil, if you could try to, or maybe do you think this is at all possible? Because I remember the last seminar that we had with you, in which you introduced the concept of academic capitalism, and well, referred to this concept to illuminate some qualitative data about first generation scholars. So I wonder, is it possible to use some insights from this interview to speak about what we could call Polish semi-peripheral academic capitalism? So do you think that this concept could be developed through your qualitative material? And if it could be developed, then do you have any ideas like about the directions it could take?
Sure, that's a great question too. So obviously, I think it's possible to write a piece about Polish peripheral, semi-peripheral capitalism, and what this particular form of capitalism looks like. So first of all, I would highlight that we have low salaries, but that's a problem also in some other systems. Then we have those teaching loads, very high teaching loads, which can be maybe not, that's not Belarusian standard, but still compared to the Western reality, it's a lot of work to do. The third thing is hierarchical structure, emphasized in nearly every interview, that this organizational culture is a problem here, even for people who were raised in like Ukraine and then went to Germany for a postdoc and find employment in Poland. So even people with Eastern origins complained about this organizational culture in Poland. Language, I think that would be something differentiating Poland from Western countries, maybe not France, but many of the Western countries, because still without Polish, it's extremely difficult to have a successful career here. Obviously, there are exceptions. There are like small units, like teams or research centers, when where it's doable. But I have one of my respondents, an American, who couldn't learn Polish. He tried. He took private lessons, then he went to Warsaw for like summer language school, but he was unable to learn Polish, and he was actually the only person I met who was frustrated about Poland and being in Poland, because he couldn't communicate at work with the neighbors. So still in Poland you need to speak Polish. This may be partially true in case of, I know, Nordic countries where Norwegian would be an advantage, but not a condition of a successful career. What else I would emphasize? This, the last thing, but Svetlana could comment on this as well, because in Poland we have something what she called in her book, in her PhD thesis, cheap science, after Sokolov, as I remember properly. Cheap science, meaning that we pretend that we're doing science, we publish in our local journal, published by our faculty or our chair. Usually there are like short pieces, just to show that we are active researchers with no impact on global science. So this pretending would be a feature of Polish capitalism. And of course, moonlighting, dual employment, because many scholars in Poland take additional jobs just to make a living. And when I was reading Svetlana's PhD thesis, I had an impression that many paragraphs can be literally about Poland. Maybe salaries in Poland are higher, but the mechanisms are really similar. So that's for now, but that's interesting thing to write an article about this type of academic capitalism. So thanks for this tip, Jakub.
Okay, we have at least two more questions, one from Svetlana and one from Ola. Svetlana, if you could join our discussion, it would be great.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kamil, for bringing attention to my recent PhD. I didn't plan to participate, but now I think I'm obliged to say something because you made so many comments about that. It's really interesting. We already talked to you about that, that there are so many similarities between careers, academic careers in Belarus and academic careers in Poland. And I think that it would be very interesting to make this comparison, qualitative comparison between very close countries. When I was doing my research, I was thinking about to compare Belarus and Russia, and Belarus and Ukraine in terms of career, because when I talk about Belarus, people usually say, but it's the same as in Russia. I was thinking that this is interesting to really compare very similar countries to understand the structural differences. And yeah, there was a question. I'm a little bit disagree with your answer regarding structural things. I think that qualitative study can really bring a lot of things about structural issues, because people don't just share their opinions about what they think about. They have their institutional careers in the sense that they go through institutions. They enter, they have some transitions from different states, and their lives in this sense are institutionalized. And this gives us access to what's going on in the society. So talking to people, we don't just know about how they feel, but also about how they construct their lives, what are their opportunities and constraints. And we know a lot about society through the conversations. And I also wanted to say that it's really interesting that in your presentation, you highlighted several characteristics of periphery. As I live now in Italy, and I made several attempts to enter Italian academia, I started to think that there's so many similarities between Italy and Belarus, and who would think about that? Because it's an extremely close academia, close to foreigners and not welcome to foreigners, with a lot of inbreeding practices. And for example, when we start to think about peripheries, I mean, and these characteristics that you highlighted, to what extent we could include Italy to that type of the countries? Yeah, because if we start to talk about, for example, inbreeding, that institutions prioritize their nationals for positions, not only for positions of authority, not only to be the director of research institute, but also to be a full-time professor, to be also postdoc. And this is a characteristic that, for example, my interviewees mentioned about many countries, not only Belarus, but also Sweden, Germany, we can name a lot of the countries. So I think that we have in mind the ideal of academia when everything is international, when merit has a high value, then people can, speak English, and this knowledge is really valued, and know a little bit of other languages, it's also very valued. But real academias in so-called Western countries are not like this. And I think that these qualitative studies really shed light to different complexities, what's going on with real people's careers. So it's not about just publishing, but about how really people struggling to get into and to move on with their ideal to be professionals in academia. And a lot of things needs to be taken into account. But anyway, thank you again for your presentation. It was very interesting to listen to it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Svetlana. Maybe just one comment, if I may. So you gave us this example of Italy, which is a brilliant example, because that's why I don't like this notion of global north. Because politically speaking, Italy is certainly a global north. But as you know, and as many papers have demonstrated, the Italian practices like inbreeding, like these conservative habitus in academia differ so much from Western Europe. So I think it's really unfair to treat Italian scholars as Western or global scholars from the global north. But you said you disagree that qualitative studies cannot have an impact on structural features. So perhaps I should phrase my point of view quite differently, because I believe that they have an impact, but not a direct impact. Those notions which I was discussing were like sensitizing concept in Blumer's sense or symbolic interactionism sense. So they they problematize certain issues, but it's really difficult to say or to state if one system is characterized by those particular features. To do that, we would need, in my opinion, larger sample and sample with Polish-born scholars or locally born scholars, because the point of view of international scholars is certainly interesting, but it's very specific and it can differ from a general perspective in the national system. So I think that's the first step. I'm talking about various experiences of those interviewees, and that's a value. We can agree on that. But to comment on structural features, I think that we need another kind of weapons or another kind of theoretical concepts that based on like surveys, which I'm not fan of, but at this stage I think it's a wise thing to do.
Okay, Ola, would you like to add something to our discussion?
Yeah, I was just curious about the relationship between the foreign scholars and Polish language, and specifically because you mentioned how they are asked to or they are expected to write in Polish. So maybe just briefly, if you could tell a little bit, say a little bit about how they engage with this request, or have you met any scholars who actually try to publish in Polish and start writing in Polish for academic purposes? Just briefly.
Of course. So the most important thing here is this disciplinary division. So no one expects foreign-born scholars to publish in Polish in like biology, chemistry, and so on. But in history or I don't know, cultural studies, there's interesting mechanism, because this is not an official pressure from dean or head of the laboratory, but internal pressure. Those people who are employed here believe that their work is not interesting for international audience. For instance, if someone compares the architecture of a certain Polish city with an architecture of certain Russian city, that's a real example, she would think about publishing it either in Polish or in Russian, because English language, that's another interesting thing, because those scholars from the East, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Russians, they usually speak some English, but they're unable to publish in English without proofreading. And as you can guess, it's difficult to get funding for proofreading. So for that reasons, they would publish in one of the languages they know, or they easily can ask someone to proofread their text. But in my sample, there were a couple of interviewees who used their life partners to act as proofreaders in Polish, or to write an email to the dean or help them to apply for funding, because in certain universities, even big universities in major Polish cities, it turned out that the dean didn't speak English. So to deal with him or her, it was necessary to have helper. It could be graduate student, it could be a wife, but third person was needed. But in case of publications, it's rather this internal pressure than external, and they saw no point in publishing in English.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I think that we ran out of time, and we had a good discussion, and we have also an opportunity to continue those topics on the last meeting in this academic year, because in June, on June 8th, actually we will host a seminar with Mikhail Sokolov and also with Zehra Tashkin from our research group. So you are all welcome to join us and continue the conversation that we had today. So that's all for today. I would like to once again say thank you to our guest, to Kamil, for sharing his research, and really finger crossed. We are really interested and happy to look forward to the final results, as this is very in line in our interest. So we wish good luck with the proceeding. Also,
the pleasure was mine. Thanks for inviting.
Great. Also, thank you to Staszek for sharing his thoughts and maybe giving some food for thought and initiating a discussion. And of course, to all of you for participating and for joining us this afternoon. In that case, please join us in 3 weeks, and we will be back with our series after the 5th one in September probably. So also look forward to meeting you again after holidays. Thank you very much, and see you in 3 weeks.